Kurt, who is the local pagan pride coordinator. He serves as assistant pagan chaplain at Hendricks Chapel and is the vice president of the Church of Greenwood. Kurt, please.
Tonight's story is one that I have taken and adapted from the lore of the ancient Norse. Of all the gods in Asgard, Tyr had the finest reputation. Tyr the brave, Tyr the just, Tyr the truthful. None were held in quite as high esteem as Tyr. And so, when it came time to deal with the menace of the Fenrir wolf, there were none who were anywhere near as qualified. A little about that wolf. Fenrir came with a prophecy, because Fenrir, it was prophesied, would be there at the downfall of the gods themselves. Fenrir would be there at Ragnarok. Fenrir would be the wolf who swallowed Odin himself. And so the gods were a little leery when they heard that Fenrir had been born. And they actually went and they stole that wolf pup away from his mother, and they brought him back to Asgard that they might keep track of him, that they might keep watch on him, that they might instill in him some of those values of honor, of truthfulness, of justice. And there was none more qualified to do that than the god called Tyr. And so Tyr took Fenrir under his wing, and the two of them hiked together, and they hunted together, and they ate together, and they slept together under the stars or under the roof. And Fenrir grew, and he grew at a tremendous rate. He grew very large, larger than any other wolf, stronger than any other wolf, more ferocious than any wolf that anyone had ever seen. And while Tyr tried to instill those qualities in him, he was unable to stop Fenrir from developing an attitude of arrogance at the same time. The other gods noted this as well. And at some point they decided that the training was not going nearly as well as they would like, and they decided that the best thing that they could do would be to take this wolf and tie it up, to bind it, to make it a prisoner. And so they strove to do just that. They gathered up a fine chain, fine, strong, heavy iron links, a great ponderous length of chain. And one day when Fenrir was coming through, they said, "You are developing a reputation for strength, for size, for ferociousness. We have a little test for you. We have this chain. We'd like to try wrapping you up in this chain, and if you can break free of it, your reputation is just going to spread that much wider." And that appealed to Fenrir's ego. That appealed to his arrogance. But to Tyr, this did not sound like an honorable thing, because Tyr understood that God's real intention was to simply tie that wolf up and hold him in his bonds. This was not just a test. This was not just a wager. And so Fenrir looked at the gods, and he looked at the chain, and he looked at his friend Tyr, and Tyr, of course, was frowning at him. But he said, yeah, I'm up to this. And he held out his paws and said, "Go ahead, bind me in your chain." And they wrapped the binding around his front legs. They wrapped the binding around his rear legs. They wrapped it around his entire body until Fenrir was bound up tight. Well, the wolf inhaled, and he flexed his muscles, and he kicked out, and the chain fell away from him as though it had been made of paper. Fenrir looked at the chain on the ground and said, "Truly, I am the strongest and fiercest who has ever been." And he walked away. Well, Tyr didn't see as much of Fenrir over the coming months. Fenrir went off on his own quite a bit, and there were many tales of livestock being taken, villages being terrorized. And Tyr was sad because he saw where this was going. He saw how much that arrogance had grown. And the rest of the gods noted that as well, and they went off and they crafted a stronger chain. Huge steel links, a magnificent length, the strongest chain that anyone had ever seen or heard of. And sure enough, when Fenrir returned, that chain was the first thing they showed him. Now Fenrir had grown stronger and larger still. And he looked at the chain and he looked at the gods and he said, "You want me to take another test, don't you?" God said, Yeah, if you can break this chain, we will spread your name far and wide. We will spread your name to all the 9 worlds indeed. Tyr, of course, was not happy about this, for he knew the gods' real intention, and he knew this was trickery. This was not an honorable solution. But Fenrir, in his arrogance, looked at the gods, looked at the chain, looked at Tyr, noted the frown, and said, "Bring it on," held out his paws, and they wrapped that chain around his front legs. They wrapped it around his back legs. They bound him up tight. They twisted him up like a pretzel in that immense, ponderous, heavy chain. Fenrir inhaled, and he flexed his muscles, and he tried to kick out, and nothing happened. And some of the gods began to laugh. They did it again. He inhaled a second time, and he flexed his muscles again, and he tried kicking out again, and still nothing happened. A little more laughter, a little bit of cheering. So Fenrir, on the third time, inhaled deeply, flexed his muscles more than he ever had before, and the chain exploded. Fragments of steel flying all over, people having to duck. And Fenrir looked at the chain and looked at the gods and said, "Is that the best you can do? Because I am the fiercest and the strongest." Well, in the coming months, Tyr didn't see any of his old friend. He was not coming around at all anymore. But the reports went up. More livestock, more terrorization. And the gods knew that they needed to do something about this. So they went to the finest craftsmen in all the 9 worlds, the dwarves. And they approached the dwarves and they explained the problem, and the dwarves said, "Well, this is an impossible task. Finding this wolf is impossible. And the only way that we can accomplish an impossible task is to use impossible means." And so the dwarves gathered the materials that they needed to make the impossible binding. The breath of a fish, the sound of a cat's footfall, the spittle of a bird, the roots of a mountain, the beard of a woman. And they took all of these impossible things and they bound them up with the sinews of a bear, and they made a long and beautiful gossamer ribbon out of all of those things. Oh, when Fenrir came around once more, and he saw the gods had gathered together, he said, "Let me guess, you've got another chain for me to break." They said, "Well, something like that." And they showed him that gossamer ribbon, that silken strip. And Fenrir looked at that strip and said, that doesn't look very strong. I think there's something else going on here." And he looked over at his old friend Tyr. And Tyr had gone beyond frowning. He was staring at the ground. He was very upset because not only was this trickery, it was now sorcery. It was no test of strength. And Fenrir picked up on that suspicion. And he said, okay, I think you're trying to trick me. I think that if I cannot break this binding, I think if the sorcery holds, I think you will leave me bound. The gods were like, no, nothing like that. No, it's not going to be like that at all. And Fenrir said, I don't believe you. I would like a little bit of insurance. I will let you bind me, and I will take your test, but only if one of you comes up here and places your right hand between my jaws. Well, in the crowd that was holding the ribbon, none stepped forward. It was Tyr who looked up, walked over, and placed his right hand into his old friend's mouth, into this monstrous wolf's mouth. Fenrir held up his paws, and they wrapped that ribbon around him. They wrapped him front legs, back legs, all over, until he was bound up tightly once again. And he took a deep breath in, and he flexed his muscles, and the bindings tightened. He did it a second time. He flexed his muscles, he took a deep breath in, he tried to kick out, and the bindings tightened yet again. He tried a third time. One more inhale, one more flex, one more kick, and the bindings were now so tight that he could not move at all. Tyr looked down. He looked into the wolf's eyes, his hand in the wolf's mouth, and he saw the question in Fenrir's eyes. He saw that question, and he knew, and he shook his head. There was a terrible crunching sound. The gods cheered, all but one. Tyr stepped back, missing a hand, but his honor intact. Fenrir? Well, they tied his bindings up and they staked him to the ground, and the gods believed that they had put that problem away once and for all. Or so they thought. Thank you.